So think with me for a moment. Have you ever lost something that was important to you? Have you ever lost something that's important to you? We all have, right? We've all lost things. Maybe not things that are important. Well, pretty important. We've lost keys. Anybody ever lose your keys? The TV remote. Maybe a little bit of our sanity every once in a while. Here at church, we have this great big basket. And there's this sign in it. It says, "Lost and Found." And there's all kinds of interesting things in there. There's one glove that's a little bit muddy. There's an umbrella in there. There's some toys. There's a water bottle. There's a dog leash in there too. Bill, maybe you need that? I don't know. These are things that are unclaimed. Things left in classrooms, left here in the church pews. And some of the stuff that's in there has been there for a long time. We don't often throw things away. I double checked with a few people. We don't often clean that basket out. We don't often throw those things away or donate them, because I think somewhere in our head and our heart, we hope that one day all of those things would be returned to the one that they belong to. Jesus once told stories about lost and found things. And he wasn't talking about keys or remotes or people's sanity. He was talking about sheep and coins and sons, children. And he told these lost and found stories because Jesus, he too holds out hope, I believe, that one day all things and all people and all of creation will one day be returned, reconciled to God. We are in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 15, more than halfway through Luke's story of the life of Jesus. And at this point in his ministry, Jesus has taught and healed in such a way that people society had labeled as outsiders and outcasts and outlaws, they began to follow Jesus faithfully. His love, his mercy, his invitation was extravagant, and they began to understand, and they began to believe the depth of God's love for them. It was something many had never experienced before, because the society they lived in had failed them. Left people to believe that because of their economic status or their infirmities or their lifestyles, or because they did not have the right bloodline, they were worthless or less than. You get the idea. Jesus came to lift up and to love and to empower those who were beaten down. So on the day Jesus told this lost and found story, many people were gathered around him. Not only the outsiders and outcasts and outlaws, but also the teachers of the law were there, the scribes and the Pharisees and others. Those religious leaders, I think, sometimes get a bad rap. But the truth is, they were people like us in some ways, people devoted to God, people trying to live the right way and do the right thing. And for them, the scribes and the Pharisees, their guide, their source of information, the litmus test that they used to determine if something was right, they followed the law of Moses and the Torah. They weren't just making things up as they went along. They weren't following some trendy new wave religious fad. They weren't regurgitating some post they saw on Facebook and liked. The rules that the Pharisees and scribes followed, the rituals, the traditions they upheld, the expectations they laid on others, these were passed down to them from generation to generation, all the way back to the day of Moses and how their ancestors in faith had interpreted what it meant to be a faithful person of God. So Jesus came, he said, not to abolish the law of Moses, but to fulfill it. Jesus himself comes as what's known as the law of love, the new litmus test that's the basis for righteousness. He came to seek out and to save the lost. So Jesus tells these lost and found parables for the outsiders, for the outcasts, for the outlaws, and also for the Pharisees and other religious leaders who were grumbling about Jesus hanging out with those other people. A man had 2 sons who worked on the family farm. The younger son went to the father and said, "Give me my inheritance, I am out of here." And the father gave the son what he asked for. He could have said, "Oh, you don't want to do that. You don't know what's out there." But the father complied and gave the son what he asked for. And the son took his inheritance and ran away from home. Maybe he thought the grass was greener on the other side. Maybe he was tired of living into family expectations. Maybe he was tired of existing in the shadow of his older brother. Maybe he was just bored or curious. We don't get the backstory, right? But he takes his inheritance, he goes far away to a distant land and engages in loose living. That's one of the translations, loose living, until eventually all he has is a hangover and empty pockets. And he finds himself then living among the swine. And that, my friends, is a dangerous place to live. The brother had fallen hard. He's far from home. He gave himself over to a citizen of a far-off country who cared nothing about him or who he was. He didn't even give him any food to eat. He just sent him off to live among the swine. Living among the swine is risky business. These are not pigs like the one we once read about in Charlotte's Web. This is not Wilbur he's hanging out with. This brother's not hanging out with the Charlie Brown character Pigpen, that messy little guy that seemed to have a cloud of odor following him around. He's living among the swine. Pigs are interesting animals. Yes, here comes a farming story. I grew up helping to take care of pigs when I was a kid. They smell really bad. They have this odor that just lingers. Even after you wash your clothes and you wash yourselves, if you hang out with them long enough, there's a stench that lingers. I live out in the country now, and so if a pig farmer drives by with a load of manure, or even if they're spreading it a few miles down the road, you got to close the windows of the house. You have to take your sheets off the wash line because it smells and it lingers. Pigs are also animals that cannot really be trained for the most part. They attract rodents, they eat garbage. And worse, if they're hungry enough, did you know they will eat humans? Did you know that? That's true. You don't want to fall down if you're in a pig pen. Living among the swine, it's risky business. Aren't you glad today is the chili challenge and it's not baby back ribs day? Anyway, we get the picture. This brother, he's at a really low point in his life. He's made some bad decisions. We might consider he feels regret or shame. He's struggled, he's suffered, he's at a place where no one knows him and nobody cares about him. And it was at this point when the brother remembered the goodness of the Father. How the Father once provided and cared well, even for his hired servants. And at this point, the brother decided to go home. He was lost, and he would soon be found at home again. And we know the Father is waiting and filled with joy to welcome him back. Now remember, Jesus is telling this story, and his hearers are people like the outsiders and the outcasts and the outlaws. What joy they must have felt to hear that Jesus told this story about this wayward son that was welcomed home by the Father. But the story doesn't end there, does it? Jesus next tells us about this older brother, the older brother who had been with the Father all along, the one who was dutiful, doing all that was expected, everything that was needed. The one that eventually was touched with such resentment from carrying all that moral weight. To the Pharisees and the scribes who heard that story, Jesus tells this story. They're struggling with the idea that God loves not only them and theirs and the ones who had been keepers of the law for generations, but that God also loves those from the hill country, those Samaritans, those outside the Jewish lineage. Jesus would have wanted those religious leaders to see themselves in that story and to understand that the Father loves them equally. One of the interesting things to note in this story, and there's a lot. I mean, you talk to anybody who knows this story, there are a lot of different ways to interpret it. It hits us all differently. One of the things that I noticed here is that neither son really gets what they want. Neither one gets what they deserve. They both get much more, as a matter of fact. God gives much more than we deserve or expect. And in this parable Jesus told, the younger son returns to the father and he says, I don't deserve to be called your son. Make me your hired hand. I'll go live with the help. I'll do whatever you want. And the father says, oh no. You grab the robe and the ring and the sandals and the fatted calf and we will have a feast. And think about the older brother. All he wants is a party and maybe a goat, right, to share with his friends. And the father says, oh no, you will not get just a party. Everything I have is yours, even your brother. Both of the sons, it seems, were lost in their own unique ways. And in the crowd that Jesus spoke to long ago, all were lost in their own unique ways. The outsiders and outcasts and outlaws, the scribes and the Pharisees alike. And if we are honest, every one of us to one degree or another, we too know what it's like to be lost, to live apart from God's ways. We're still learning how to do that, right? Jesus told this lost and found story so that we can know that we live in a world where someone is determined to have us come home. It's a story about the Father who will meet us when we crawl in from those far-off places after good times or bad. It's a story about a Father who will step out into the places of our own self-righteousness and beg for us to come to the banquet and experience joy. I was talking with a few people about this text yesterday. Do you think that the church exudes the joy of the Lord? I think that's another important piece in this story. The Father wants his sons to have joy. Come to the party. I think maybe for us, or for anyone here who has ever lived life in the proverbial lost and found basket, there's good news for us today. Jesus has come so that no one would remain lost. Not the outsiders, not the outcasts, not the outlaws, not the scribes or the Pharisees, not you or me. For the one who returns or turns to the Father, there is life, there is joy, there is reason to celebrate. There is a story of another prodigal son who left his home, spent his days in foolish living. He once spared no expense to furnish wedding guests with gallons of choice wine. He was known to hang out with the riffraff in town, sometimes even sharing a meal with them. He spent his days talking to prostitutes and touching the sores on the skin of lepers. Once, he even allowed a woman to rub his feet with her hair. That son lived a scandalous life. He was out of control, breaking all the rules so that no one, not one, would be lost. Thanks be to God. Let's pray.